Nathan sold everything with AI in the name last month. Too risky, he said. Meanwhile, Jake went the other way, loading up on NVIDIA calls, certain he's ahead of everyone else. They think they're on opposite sides of the same bet. They're not. Nathan's Safe Index Fund and Jake's Target Date Fund both hold the same 10 AI-linked companies in the same concentration, whether either of them wanted it or not. Nathan thinks he escaped. Jake thinks he's ahead of the curve. Neither one bothered to check what was actually sitting inside the account they didn't touch, and that's really the story of this entire video. Not whether artificial intelligence is a bubble, not whether it's the future of the economy. The story is that millions of people have already answered that question with their money, without ever being asked. Open any finance app, any headline, any comment section right now, and you'll find the same argument running in circles. Half the room is convinced artificial intelligence is the biggest speculative bubble since the dot-com crash. The other half is convinced it's the most important technological shift of this century, and the spending is fully justified. Both sides argue with real conviction. Both sides bring real numbers. And both sides are arguing about a question that, for most people watching this video, doesn't actually matter nearly as much as they think it does. Here's why. The bubble question is a bet about the future. Nobody, not the analysts at the big banks, not the fund managers, not us, can tell you today whether artificial intelligence spending will pay off the way its backers expect. That's genuinely unknown, and anyone who tells you otherwise with total confidence is guessing. But there's a second question hiding behind the first one. And this one isn't a bet. It's arithmetic. It's not asking whether the bubble will pop. It's asking how much of your money is already riding on the outcome right now, today, whether you ever chose to make that bet or not. That second question is the one almost nobody answers, because answering it means opening up your retirement account and actually looking at what's inside it, line by line, instead of trusting the label on the fund. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Start with the phrase everyone repeats like a mantra. Buy an index fund. It's diversified. It spreads your risk across hundreds of companies instead of betting on one. For most of financial history, that advice held up beautifully, and honestly, it still isn't wrong advice on its own terms. But the mechanics behind it have quietly changed over the last several years, and almost nobody went back and updated the mental model to match. Here's the part that gets skipped in almost every version of this advice. An S&P 500 index fund isn't weighted equally across its 500 companies. It's weighted by size, specifically by market capitalization, meaning the bigger a company gets, the more of your money automatically flows into it every single time you contribute, without you ever making a new decision. When the index was first built, this didn't matter much, because no single company or handful of companies dominated the economy the way a small group does today. But the moment a handful of companies become large enough, the math of the fund starts behaving less like 500 small independent bets and more like 10 very large correlated ones, wrapped in the comforting appearance of 500. That shift didn't happen because the index changed its rules. It happened because the companies inside it changed size, and the fund, doing exactly what it was designed to do, followed the money automatically. So let's actually do the math instead of guessing at it, the same way we do with every number on this channel. Pull the current holdings of a standard S&P 500 fund, the kind sitting inside most 401k accounts and most target date funds in this country, and rank every company by weight. The top 10 companies in that fund, purely by size, currently make up just over 37.5% of the entire fund. Not 37.5% of some aggressive tech fund built for risk-tolerant investors. 37.5% of the boring, diversified, set it and forget it fund that shows up in almost every default retirement plan in America. The one people choose specifically because they don't want to think about it. Now narrow that further. Instead of asking which 10 companies are simply the biggest, ask a more specific question. Which companies inside that fund are directly exposed to the artificial intelligence build-out through chips, cloud infrastructure, or the capital spending driving both? Run that filter, and you land on 10 names: NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Broadcom, Meta, Tesla, Micron. Advanced micro devices. Add up their combined weight inside that same standard fund, and the number comes out to just under 39%. Sit with that for a second. Roughly 39 cents of every single dollar sitting in a plain, unremarkable S&P 500 index fund is currently riding on the outcome of the artificial intelligence build-out. Not because the person holding that fund researched artificial intelligence stocks and made a deliberate decision to buy in. Because the fund's own math automatically routes more and more of every dollar toward whichever companies happen to be growing the fastest. And right now, that happens to be a tight cluster of companies making the exact same bet on the exact same technology at the exact same time. If the number is real and it's sitting in plain sight for anyone who wants to look, why doesn't it feel that way to most people? 3 reasons, and they compound on each other. First, the name on the account gives no warning whatsoever. A fund labeled Target Retirement 2050 or Total Market Index doesn't advertise its underlying concentration anywhere in its marketing. The name promises broad exposure and a hands-off approach, and to be fair, it does deliver hands-off. It just doesn't deliver what most people assume broad actually means anymore. The holdings underneath tell a very different story, but almost nobody scrolls past the fund's summary page to read the actual constituent list. Second, the concentration built up gradually, not all at once, which makes it far easier to miss. Nobody woke up one morning to a fund that had suddenly shifted 39% of its weight into 10 companies overnight. It crept there, one earnings report and one price rally at a time, over the better part of 2 years. Gradual change is much harder to notice than a sudden one, even when the eventual destination is just as dramatic as if it had happened all at once. Third, and this is the one that actually explains Nathan and Jake specifically, people assume the danger only shows up if they go looking for it on purpose. Nathan felt safe because he actively avoided anything with AI in the ticker or the headline. He made a conscious choice to steer clear. Jake felt smart because he actively sought more exposure, buying calls on the most obvious name in the space, convinced he was getting ahead of everyone else. Both of them were making decisions based entirely on what they thought they were doing on purpose. Neither of them checked what their passive account was doing automatically in the background without asking either of them for permission first. Quick pause here, because there's a piece of this that gets easier to understand once you can actually see it laid out with your own numbers instead of just hearing someone else's percentage on a video. Inside the Wealth Logicians community, there's a full library of calculators built for exactly this kind of situation. Tools where you plug in your own holdings and get your own answer instead of taking a stranger's word for it. If that's useful to you, it's linked below, and it's worth checking out before we go any further into the rest of this. Now back to the part of this story that doesn't show up on a fund's marketing page at all, because the concentration itself is only half of what makes this particular moment different from past ones. The other half is what's actually financing it underneath the surface. Every one of these 10 companies is currently spending an enormous amount of money building the physical infrastructure behind artificial intelligence. Data centers, chips, power contracts, all of it at a scale most people never see reflected in a stock price. And how a company chooses to account for that spending on paper turns out to matter just as much in some ways as how much it's actually spending in the first place. Here's the specific mechanism, and it's simpler than it sounds once you strip away the jargon. When a company buys equipment, in this case servers and networking hardware, it doesn't expense the full cost the moment the purchase happens. Instead, it spreads that cost out gradually. Over the years, the equipment is expected to remain useful, a process called depreciation. The number of years a company assumes an asset will last is called its useful life, and that number is ultimately just an estimate, a judgment call made internally by the company's own accountants. Stretch that estimate longer, and the annual cost booked against profit shrinks, which makes earnings look stronger today than they might otherwise appear. Shrink the estimate instead, and the opposite happens. The cost gets pulled forward, and earnings take the hit up front. This matters here specifically because 2 of the largest companies on that AI Big 10 list made opposite calls on the exact same category of asset in the exact same calendar year. According to Meta's own annual report filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the company completed an internal assessment of its servers and network assets in January of 2025 and extended their estimated useful life to a range of 5 to 5.5 years. Based on their own disclosure, that single accounting decision reduced Meta's 2025 depreciation expense by approximately $2.9 billion. In plain terms, the same category of servers that used to be assumed to lose their usefulness faster are now assumed to remain useful for longer. And that assumption alone made 2025 profits look roughly $3 billion stronger than they otherwise would have looked. Amazon went the other direction entirely. In that same window, Amazon revised the useful life of a subset of its own servers and networking equipment, moving it from 6 years down to 5. According to Amazon's own disclosures, that change reduced 2025 operating income by approximately $700 million, on top of roughly $920 million in accelerated depreciation the company had already booked for equipment. It decided to retire early, rather than keep running. Read those two decisions side by side, and the contrast becomes obvious. Same industry, same category of hardware, same effective date, January of 2025. One company's accountants looked at their AI infrastructure and decided it would last longer than previously assumed. The other company's accountants looked at essentially the same category of equipment and decided it wouldn't last nearly as long as previously assumed. Both decisions were entirely legal. Both were fully disclosed in public filings. And both quietly moved the exact profit numbers that investors rely on to judge whether the AI build-out is actually paying off the way it's supposed to. This isn't proof of anything sinister happening behind closed doors, and it would be unfair to frame it that way. It's proof of something more unsettling in a quieter sense. A number as basic as how long a piece of equipment lasts isn't a fact that everyone actually agrees on. It's an estimate, and different companies are currently making very different estimates about the exact same technology in the exact same year, which should tell you something about how uncertain even the people running these companies are about their own hardware's real lifespan. There's a second mismatch sitting underneath all of this, and it's a physical one rather than an accounting one, which makes it harder to argue away with a different estimate. According to research published by the Bank for International Settlements, the graphics processing units at the center of the AI build-out lose somewhere between 30 and 35% of their value every single year. That's roughly the pace at which each new generation of chips makes the previous generation meaningfully less competitive and less valuable. Meanwhile, the data center buildings constructed to house those exact chips are designed to last between 20 and 30 years, an entirely different order of magnitude. Picture what that mismatch actually means in practice. On the ground, the chips sitting inside a given data center will likely need to be replaced several times over before the building around them ever reaches the end of its own useful life. And increasingly, those same chips are being used as collateral for the debt that financed the building's construction in the first place, meaning the loan is secured against an asset that could lose close to a third of its value within a single year. The Bank for International Settlements has specifically flagged this as a type of collateral risk without a clear historical precedent. Because nothing in modern finance has previously combined this much borrowed money with an asset depreciating quite this fast, this consistently, at this scale. None of this means the AI build-out is doomed, and it's worth being genuinely clear about that before moving on. Companies retire and replace hardware constantly as a normal part of doing business, and large infrastructure investments always involve some assets aging faster than others around them. But it does mean the 10 companies making up roughly 39% of a standard index fund are simultaneously making a bet on hardware that ages in a matter of years, financed partly through debt structures built to last decades, and accounted for using useful life assumptions their own accounting departments apparently can't even agree on from one company to the next. So, where does that actually leave Nathan and Jake? And more importantly, where does it leave you watching this right now? Marcus didn't panic and sell everything the way Nathan did. He also didn't chase more exposure the way Jake did. What Marcus actually did was simpler and a lot less dramatic than either of those reactions. He opened his own retirement account, looked at what fund he was actually holding instead of assuming he already knew, and calculated his real number instead of guessing at it. It turned out his target date fund carried almost the exact same concentration as the standard S&P 500 fund we just walked through together, because target date funds are typically built on that same market cap weighted logic, just wrapped underneath a different label and a different marketing pitch. Marcus didn't close his account in a panic. He didn't move everything into cash the way Nathan effectively did. He made one modest adjustment, a small addition to a fund weighted differently than his existing holdings, just enough to bring his overall exposure down to a level he was genuinely comfortable holding if the bet on artificial intelligence ends up taking longer to pay off than the market currently expects. The point here isn't that Marcus discovered some secret allocation formula nobody else has access to. The point is that Marcus was simply the only one of the three who bothered to check the actual number before deciding what, if anything, to do about it. Here's what this all comes back to, in the end. Nathan sold out of anything labeled artificial intelligence and still ended up holding it anyway, buried inside the very fund he genuinely believed was neutral. Jake bought more of it on purpose and never once realized his supposedly diversified target date fund was already carrying nearly the same exposure before he ever added a single additional dollar. Both of them made a decision about artificial intelligence. Neither of them made an informed one, because neither of them checked the number first before acting on instinct instead. The AI bubble question, whether it's real, whether it eventually pops, whether it turns out to be the greatest investment opportunity of this generation, that question is still genuinely unanswered, and it's probably going to stay unanswered for a good while yet, regardless of how confidently either side argues it. But the separate question of how exposed your own money already is to that outcome isn't a mystery, and it isn't a prediction either. It's arithmetic sitting quietly inside an account you already own, and it takes about 5 minutes to actually go look at it properly. That's really the whole difference between Nathan, Jake, and Marcus in this story. Not who happened to guess right about artificial intelligence in the end, just who actually bothered to check before deciding anything. If you want to run this same math against your own holdings instead of just the example fund we walked through here today, that's exactly the kind of thing the wealth logicians community was built around from the start. Every calculator inside that vault works the same basic way. Plug in your own numbers, get your own answer back. No guessing involved anywhere in the process. It's linked below if you want to take a closer look at your own accounts using the same process we just walked through together in this video. Either way, the bubble debate isn't going to resolve itself this week, and it probably isn't going to resolve itself this year either, but your own number already exists right now, sitting quietly inside an account you already own, whether you've actually looked at it yet or not.